1998, LucasArts and Factor 5 released Star Wars Rogue Squadron for the Nintendo 64 and Windows PC. Unlike, say, X-Wing/TIE Fighter series of games, which are flight simulators in vein of, well, Microsoft's Flight Simulator, it is a more simplistic arcade-like experience in that you have just a simple set of controls to work with, all the while giving you more freedom to move your fighter during mission. Following that, Factor 5 would release Battle for Naboo for the N64 and PC as well in 2000. The other sequels, Rogue Leader and Rebel Strike, however, did not get a PC release and were instead exclusive for Nintendo's then following system, the GameCube. However, LucasArts would release a substitute of sorts for the PlayStation 2 a few months prior to Rogue Leader's launch, with the Xbox version coming months later and a PC version in 2002. Said game was called Star Wars Starfighter. Like Battle for Naboo, the story of the game is yet another side story to the Phantom Menace, but with 3 different characters playable rather than one. One is Royal Naboo star pilot Rhys, another is mercenary Vana and a smuggler named Nim. Each have their own unique ships to pilot, such as the N1 Starfighter for Rhys, the Guardian Mantis for Vana, and the Havoc Bomber for Nim. While on a mission to escort Padme Amidala to meet with Trade Federation officials, Rhys and his mentor Isara Till are ambushed by a mercenary group under contract from the Trade Federation, with Rhys losing his mentor after the battle. Vana herself gets double-crossed by her Trade Federation contractors, leaving her to try and recruit Nim by trying to free him from prison, only for Nim to throw her in his cell for a time. But as for Nim, he gets pulled into the conflict against the Federation when the droid forces find his hideout. And it is right then our 3 main heroes, with the help of the toy Darian named Reddy, unite together to fight the Battle for Naboo. It's a basic enough premise, but it works. Now for the gameplay, which as I've said before, is very similar to Factor 5's Rogue Squadron, in that it is a simple arcade-style action aerial combat game. However, there are some notable differences in that, unlike Rogue Squadron, there is a slightly better targeting system that shows the player health and shield meters to determine how long a ship stays alive, and there is a sniper zoom allowing the player to get better sight from distant foes headed their way. Another difference is that each ship is unique to the 3 main characters. Rhys has the standard N1 Starfighter with regular torpedoes, Vana has the Guardian Mantis with tagging missiles that replenish over time, and Nim with this Havoc equipped with ion bombs that again replenish over time. All of them matching each character, and with more ship to unlock as extras, there's plenty to work with. Speaking of extras, besides starships, more additional levels can be unlocked once you earn gold medals for most stages. Though the PC version seems to be missing the multiplayer modes on the console versions, not even featuring online support, which is a little bit disappointing, but not a huge deal for me as I've done mostly single player these days. For a simplistic arcade-style shooter set in the Star Wars galaxy, the game does its job in playing pretty well on the PC, as the frame rate runs pretty smoothly, which improved upon the slowdown I experienced on the PlayStation 2 version sometimes. Though I will say on both systems, it looked pretty damn solid as well, at least for its time. But one thing that is pretty dang disappointing to me is that the campaign is fairly short, but does give at least some replay value by going back to levels and unlocking playable missions and ships. Still, it doesn't last too long even then. In the end though, hold the phone, Ninty fan of the past, Ninty fan of the future from 2023 here to briefly discuss with you the Xbox version of the game, and while it's the same game, there are some differences. For one, the Xbox version, as advertised, has a more stable frame rate than the PlayStation 2 version. Though keep in mind I played it backwards compatible on Xbox One X and not classic Xbox hardware, but nevertheless, it's at a stable frame rate so no complaints. In addition, there are also some slight visual improvements. Nothing that pushes the Xbox to the limit, but still, you can see it by some of the shine on the ships. 2. Some new content that can only be found on the Xbox version, which includes some new bonus levels such as Droid Hunt, where you play as Vana as she recovers mining droids from a reactivated Trade Federation outpost on the volcanic planet of Eos. There is even some unlockable multiplayer variants of some levels, if you have the patience to get them. But to end it all, the Xbox version is still the same game as it was on the PlayStation 2 and PC, as I have said before, with it still being a fairly short game as mentioned before. All things considered though, I'd lean on playing the Xbox version slightly more for a definitive version due to the extra content and frame rate. Between this and the PC version on Steam, though, can't go wrong when it goes on sale on digital stores.
And since we have both Starfighter games playable on modern hardware, could we please do the same for these last two Rogue Squadron games?
At the start of 2020, I reviewed the first of two games in the short-lived Starfighter series of Star Wars games. Now, I want to talk about its follow-up, Jedi Starfighter, released in 2002 for the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox Classic, the latter of which will be the sole version I'm reviewing here. So as one would expect, Jedi Starfighter takes place during Attack of the Clones the same way the original Starfighter game takes place during the Phantom Menace. And as I said in my review for the prior game, the short-lived part of the series is very similar to the Rogue Squadron series of Star Wars games, with the only differences being a focus on the prequels, exception being Revenge of the Sith, and being multi-platform for consoles except for Nintendo, as the GameCube practically kept the latter series to itself since Rogue Leader. While Rogue Squadron was developed by Factor 5, the Starfighter games were developed by LucasArts and Secret Level. The story of the game has Jedi Knight Adi Gallia on a mission to fight off the Trade Federation and the Confederacy of Independent Systems, as well as their contract with an evil mercenary named Kavik Toth, developer of the deadly Hex missiles. Due to this, Adi must join forces with the space pirate Nim from the previous game to fend off the catastrophic weapons. Like with its prequel before it, it's simple, but it works. Gameplay-wise, it plays the same as the original Starfighter, in that it's an arcade-style aerial combat game that still plays very well. However, instead of the N1 Starfighter and the Guardian Mantis returning, only Nim's Havoc Bomber returns, with its blasters, ion cannons, self-replenishing plasma bombs, everything's here. With some new additions including two kinds of missiles from concussion to cruise to proximity mines. But now, as the title suggests, we now have control of the new Starfighter at the time, the Jedi Starfighter, which in this game is piloted by Adi Gallia. This version of the ship has no missiles, but for its secondary weaponry, it does allow the Jedi's use of the Force to use for varying reasons. From the Force Barrier, temporary defense, Force Lightning to take out a chain of smaller crafts, Force Speed or Reflex to slow time around you, and Force Shockwave to wipe out a ton of enemies within your radius. Alongside the two main crafts, you'll be able to unlock several others as cheats depending on how you beat various missions and all of their objectives from their primary to bonus and even hidden. Some but not all of the examples include the Slave 1, Reddy's own ship known as the Zoomer, and even the X-Wing and TIE Fighter, despite not being invented at this time of the Star Wars saga. Besides that, there is quite a bit of multiplayer content too, such as co-op and some versus-centric stages, making it pretty packed. Visually, it looks about the same as the original Starfighter, but on the Xbox One backwards compatibility function, the game looks very crisp whether you play it on a standard Xbox One or an Xbox One X in 1080p, which I sadly couldn't show when I recorded this footage due to the time limits with recording depending on what resolution I set it on. Still, when you get to it, it looks great. What I still don't like is that it's still a fairly short game like the last one, but I personally find that the extra content and hidden objectives in each mission give it a bit more replay value. Again, like the last one, but in this one I find it to be more interesting. Overall, Jedi Starfighter is a pretty damn good follow-up to the original Starfighter, and for me personally, one I had a bit more fun with. I definitely recommend picking up the Xbox version if you have any variation of the Xbox One due to the benefit of backwards compatibility, but it's worth hunting down if you have an older system that still works as well. Star Wars Jedi Starfighter deserves an 8 out of 10.